Hi there, welcome to this, our second webinar in our series of webinars from NetSupport. Alan, just share a little bit about yourself, if you could, please, for our audience. You're someone who I've known as being like, de facto, like, I mean, you know about the next trend or the next issue around online safety before I think even the internet does. Could you share a little about who you are, your background, and what you do, please?
Well, I specialise in TikTok dance challenges. No, just Mark, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I specialise in online safety. Online safety is all I do, and it's what I've been doing since 2007. So predominantly, I work in education nationally and on the odd occasion internationally, but I don't like doing that too much because I don't like to fly, quite honestly. So I work mainly in schools around England, Scotland, and Wales, whether that's speaking to staff, to the students, to the parents, the governors, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that is with a focus on using and appreciating technology appropriately. That's the angle that I tend to come from. I also wear another hat as well. So in a completely voluntary capacity, I work with Lincolnshire Police in their POLIT team. POLIT stands for the Paedophile Online Investigations Team. And in that, I lead and manage the Lincolnshire Police Safeguarding Network. So this is a network of officers who essentially, when we get reported to us of a child or a young person who has shared indecent images or videos online, then we will first and foremost investigate to identify the victim and safeguard that victim. So I work very closely with them. That's clearly an area that is getting bigger and bigger, and I could go on about that for hours, but that's not a part of this evening. But in a nutshell, Mark, that's me.
No, brilliant stuff, and I know just from some of the things you shared last week on Twitter around sort of new AI deep fakes and that sort of thing. And then lo and behold, after you'd shared about it and some great advice, we saw that stuff in the news, didn't we?
Yeah.
About those Spanish children who I'm sure we'll dive into that as part of the conversation this afternoon. But these are worrying and troubling times. But Beverly, can you share a little bit about your sort of background and your work and how you sort of work in online safety, please, as well?
Oh, hello, good afternoon. Delighted to join everyone today. So I'm Beverly. I'm a Tech Women 100 award winner and former teacher. So my background is in teaching. I started in corporate IT, then moved into teaching. And I've now developed a career in consulting, coaching, authoring, and a few other things. Okay, so related to online safety, I advocate for digital literacy. I really am keen to focus on the curriculum and professional development around online safety. So that's for teachers and also parents. And like parents, be more educated around online safety. So some of the ways in which you see me getting involved in this type of work is at workshops and conferences with online safety themes. So you may have seen me getting involved with Amazing ICT up in Shropshire, and they do some work around online safety locally. And I was very happy to lend my expertise in that area and to talk and just education. I really think more education is needed to talk and to discuss. And I also work with a company down in Surrey, EduThing, and again, the same type of thing, educating teachers about what's available to help them to deliver in the classroom and also what they can do to foster that homeschool link. So I'm all about getting online safety embedded and digital literacy into the curriculum.
Well, that's brilliant to hear. Thank you, Beverly. And certainly, not only are you traveling around the country, sharing about these great approaches. What I love there as well was recognizing the importance of sort of digital literacy and online safety and thinking for things not just for children, but for adults, for parents as well. Speaking as a parent of teenage boys myself, Alan's known my two since they were not teenage boys. But I'm also a parent governor in their school, and lots of our conversations are around not only safeguarding in terms of things within the school, but supporting parents with things around screen time and tools they have access to and all those sort of things. So great to hear that you're deeply involved in that sort of sharing and advocacy and that sort of work, because I think it's deeply important. And when we talk more later in the conversation around Kixi, you know, John Hattie, when we talk about education in general, John Hattie talks about the biggest impacts happen when you triangulate support, not just with the school and the child, but the home as well. And I think that's absolutely pivotal in these sorts of conversations as well. So jumping into the questions for the webinar around online safety for this afternoon, I'll just jump back straight to you if I can, Beverly, if that's all right. Online safety can be quite a tricky subject to broach with our youngest learners. You mentioned authoring, and you might want to, I'm not going to sort of tell you what to say, but you might want to bring up that in the conversation in response to this. So, but have you got any approaches you could share that have worked that are particularly age appropriate for certain ages of learners?
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. It can be a very tricky topic. So I want to share with you some of my experiences from being a parent and also a teacher and an educator. And I really think a lot of it is rooted in conversation, to have those really important conversations and a dialogue for all ages. I know it may get trickier as your children get older, but it is for all ages. So take an interest in what your child is doing online. I say that's the first starting point for a parent. And also for teachers, ask their students, what are you doing online? And listen to what's coming back. So it's that, discussion. And then, drill in. If you'll find out if they found anything that's challenging, difficult, if there's anything embarrassing, find out what's going on. And I'd say also have a really good relationship if you're a teacher with the safeguarding lead at school, just so you have that ongoing dialogue between each other. I'd also, discuss news articles with older children at school around things like cyberbullying, internet scams, just anything inappropriate content. It's this whole education piece, so no one feels like they're actually alone in this conversation. And also, as a teacher, as a parent, you can model good behavior. So things like privacy settings. How do you actually keep yourself safe? Just this, it's awareness there. So what is actually going on? Someone said something to me yesterday, which really resonated with me. We know how to keep our children safe in terms of road safety. So let's translate the same thing to online safety. So it shouldn't be, it's tech, I'm scared of that. Let's just translate in the same way and take a real strong interest in online safety in that way. So I'll share another example from the classroom. If you're doing anything with gaming, talk about the PEGI ratings. Why do we have PEGI ratings? What's the importance of them? So, really start to get those conversations going. And as a parent, if your child is asking to play a game, think about the PEGI rating, not if it's popular and if their mates are playing it, but what is actually going on and what could have possibly affect this young person. And so we need that constant dialogue and conversation there. So I'd say that it's an awareness. Being a tech parent is being an aware parent and sharing and modeling with your child, and being a teacher, regardless of the topic, the subject you're teaching, it's really having that awareness, because it's all of our responsibility to help, young people around online safety.
No, I couldn't agree more. I'd like to bring you on that sort of point as well, if I can, Alan, because I think one of the sort of Beverly shared lots of insightful approaches and all those sort of things in what she shared there. But I think a key word for me from that was conversations, because often when we think about sort of perhaps the criminality or some of the things around grooming and those sort of things, these sorts of people often prey on the fact that the young people might not want to actually have a conversation about it for fear of retribution or upset. What are your thoughts around that, Alan?
I think Beverly is absolutely spot on with that, and one of the key things I think she mentioned there was that, and this is quite generic, is that adults don't really understand the online lives of children, and so if you don't understand the online lives of children, how can you keep them safe? And what does safe even mean? Does safe mean stopping them from doing things, or does it mean looking at the appropriate use of technology and how to recognize, manage, and mitigate risky situations. Because at the end of the day, that's what students want. They want support, not blame. And I think that's very, very important. And that's from the word of students. Older students, year 9s, year 10s, who say themselves, look, we're adolescents, we're hardwired to make mistakes and take risks. That's a whole part of the growing up process. So don't victim blame us, support us through this process and help and guide us and understand that we are going to be making mistakes. And I think this is both from the perspective of parents and educators in general, or any person working with children and young people. Unless you understand the online lives of children, and I mean that by putting yourself in their shoes, understand where they're going and what they're doing and their motivations for doing so, which is the absolute key one. It's the number one thing, is understanding their motivations for doing things. Unless you understand that, you will never, ever be able to talk to children about their online lives. But once you do start to understand it, and you can only really understand that by talking with them, not by talking at them. Once you do start to understand that, then a lot more becomes clear. There's a lot more focus behind that. For example, you mentioned the word screen time there earlier on, Mark. Now, I don't use the word screen time. I don't like it. And the reason I don't like it is because there's absolutely no context to it whatsoever. What does time mean? Screen time, what does it mean? When you see in the media, there's a suggestion that all screen time is bad, and that's just not the case at all. Screen time is a fundamental part of every single one of our lives, in 2023 onwards. So to take gaming as an example, a lot of parents very understandably are concerned about the amount of time their children are spending on games. But this is what I say about the motivations. The motivation for the majority of children and young people playing games, as well as having fun, is to be with their mates. If they're there playing with their mates, they will want to be there for as long as possible. So again, once you start to understand the motivations, it gives you a slightly different focus. Where is time really the biggest factor? Time is a factor, of course it is, but it's not the main factor. The main factor is they want to be with their friends. And I think that's something we learned really quite hard during lockdown. And I think that getting that message across of what Professor Sonia Livingston says, it's not about screen time, it's about screen use. And that is the most important one of all.
No, absolutely. And it again, not all screen time or screen use is equal. Sitting and doing something inanely or whatever it is for a long period of time might not be seen as being very good. Knowing good practices around the sort of 20-20-20 rule for making sure that you spend 20 seconds looking 20 feet away to reset your eyes to help you with those sort of things. But if you and it depends on what you're doing when you're online and those sort of scenarios as well. I wanted to unpick with you both because there are lots of risks, obviously lots of rewards for using technology and being online as well. But jumping out to your work and particularly around the police and your interactions with them, Alan, what do you see as being the sort of the biggest threats for young people online at the moment?
Oh, how long have we got? I think there's many, but I think that's unfair. So if I was to pick a couple out. The main concerns that I personally have, so it's not it's not scientific research or anything like that. So I think one of those is the very fact that we are seeing a big generational change going on. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. And as part of that is what I call the parasocial effect. In other words, it's that one-sided relationship we have with whoever it is that's on our screens, whether it's a YouTuber, a TikToker, or some influencer on Snapchat. So that one-sided relationship, which can be, incredibly influential to some people. Not all, but to some people, it can be incredibly influential. So, say, for example, young people using Snapchat. for example, as we all know, an incredibly popular app out there. But many young people use Snapchat as more like their local news stories rather than, just engaging with their friends and everything else. And yet, as a part of that, they're seeing violence, they're seeing stabbings, they're seeing sexual assaults, and all sorts of other things. And this is happening in their local area because Snapchat can be very localized. And that is, negatively influential. And a lot of the other things are seen as well, sexualized content and, everything else. So we're seeing a massive generational shift going on at the moment. And there's nothing to suggest that's going to be stopping anytime soon. It just isn't. So that's a big concern. And that's not a concern over the technology. The technology is always blamed for this. It's a concern over what people are using as part of their technological use. In other words, the technology is the mode of transport, if you will. And so, there are major concerns around that. For me at the moment, my biggest concern, and something you alluded to earlier on, Mark, is the use of artificial intelligence, which is, high on everybody's list at the moment, of which there are enormous benefits. I'm sure we're all using AI to one extent or another, and we all have been for years, whether we realize it or not. The concerns around this are, for one, the accuracy of AI that we're seeing now, particularly in relation to bodies, face cloning, that type of thing, where it's now incredibly accurate, but also the public accessibility of these tools. They are so freely available now. It's really concerning. And top of my list for that, and it's the reason why I put that video out last week, Mark, on Twitter and LinkedIn, is the use of this face cloning, which I think is predominantly going to be by males in order to violate females, quite honestly. So cloning the face of a female student, for example, onto an adult sex star's body, for example. Now, that's happened for years. There's nothing new in that, as awful as that is. But now the use of AI technology means that can be done in seconds, and it looks incredibly real. AI has come on so far. It was only 3-4 months ago where you could pretty much tell it was in artificial intelligence, because quite often it had 6 fingers, for example. That was a good telling point. And the other one was that the skin looked very, very plasticky. No longer. It's not like that anymore. It's come on, so far. We are already seeing these in the police, forces across nationally. This is already being seen. And I think this is hugely concerning. The question on many of our lips is, are we really going to be seeing this at scale? And the answer is we don't know. For example, 4-5 years ago now, there were massive concerns around deep fake videos, but it never really came to fruition. There was the odd thing here and there, don't get me wrong, but we never really saw it at scale. So is it going to be the same with this? And the answer is we just don't know. But the fact is we need to know about it so that we can deal with it, when it does happen. So they are my big concerns.
A lot to unpick there, isn't there? And like I said, no longer, as soon as I saw your sort of, your forewarning and your crystal ball gazing around that, and then lo and behold, there's been the issue which was reported. And if you're interested in finding out more about it, just check the sort of BBC news pages or your favourite news outlets to learn about what's been happening in Spain. It's a big deal, isn't it? Thank you so much for sharing around that, Alan. Some really good food for thought there. I'll jump back to you, Beverly, if I could, please. I say, with online safety being, schools spend an awful lot of money on technology, and just like they'll want a return on their investment with employing teachers, so they'll want to use technology for teaching and learning, and to support infrastructure, and to facilitate assessment and feedback, and all these sorts of things. But it could be seen as being somewhat off-putting. If you've got all these things that could happen and go wrong, and ruin your lesson and impact on progress and all these different things, because teaching is quite a high-stakes profession, as we all know. Have you got any sort of words of advice or some simple approaches that educators could follow around all these sort of things to make sure that they feel confident that when they sort of ask if it's a one-to-one school and every child has a device, they ask them to get them out, or they take the time to book themselves into a room where technology is available for children to use. Have you got some words of confidence and some ideas and approaches that could be helpful to them?
Yeah, well, yes, I think you could approach this in a couple of ways. And the way in which I'm going to sort of go look at is where educators are sometimes concerned about engaging online, and sort of engaging in Twitter chats or YouTube, and just using social media or doing anything online. And so if I come at this from a story, when I was teaching, I done a video for the DFE, so a video about promoting the computing curriculum. And then a short while later, through my own children who were at a different school, I found out that this video had been taken and I had horns applied to my head by the students of my school, and it had gone viral. And so it links in with what Alan was saying about understanding the motivation behind why students were doing this. And I think it was the part, they were obviously using their skills, but it's part of being a group. So everybody was in the group. And, when this had gone across, to another school, it was a bit of a shock. And I found out at home over the dinner table. So I think for educators and online issue, I think it's being mindful of who you project online. I mean, you can't really stop someone deciding to put horns in your head. It's one of those unfortunate things. But I'd also look at the types of threads which you get involved in and think about how you'd like to project yourself. Do you want to get into divisive discourse, or do you want to get into somewhat of positive conversations? And I tend to lead with a positive at all times, and I don't get into just opinions, because everyone has got an opinion on something. So with to bring it back to the classroom, one-to-one devices, I think it's back to the safety and working within the school's policies and guidelines. So ensuring that the students know that in this environment, these are the guidelines, they're here for this reason, communicating that message back home also, that within this setting, this is how we work. And so, as an educator, I also tend to keep my work and home lives very separate, because I think bringing these two together, if you're in a classroom and you're using your machine for your home and work life, it's not good, in my opinion. So I would encourage model this positive behavior. I'd also say, as an educator, not accepting requests and connections from current students or from past students, because the online world, it becomes very, very small. The algorithms don't work, and they're just going to keep feeding suggestions to you. And it's very easy to click on something, a request, and accept it. And then your whole world can start unraveling quite quickly. So I would avoid personally doing that. I'd also, for educators, I'd register your name with a Google service, so that if your name is flags up anywhere online, you're made aware. So I'll put Beverly Clarke into a Google engine, and not Googling myself, but just the Google Alert service, so that if my name is used in any a blog, anywhere it's mentioned, I get that alert. 99.9% of the time, you don't need to do anything. It's just someone else with the same name. Our names aren't unique, but it's just being aware of how to protect yourself, and this awareness, and again, working with the relevant authorities if anything goes wrong, and within the classroom, really modeling good behavior, talking about it. And I'm quite strong about bringing in news articles and getting our young people to talk about these and understand what's going on in the world, and why what they are doing could get them into a bit of hot water, and why it could be illegal, some of the things that they may choose to do online.
No, you made lots of great points there, and I'll try and summarize those. But that last one you shared there is great, because often in schools we haven't got time to do online safety, So that idea about bringing in news articles, and that's something that can happen in, if it's relevant to a specific subject, you'll see something that's interesting, you can bring that into any lesson when it's relevant to your subject. It's also something which is really useful for tutor time, pastoral time, quiet time,
Mhm.
reading time. If you're in primary, you're supposed to sort of be able to read from real sources, all these sort of things. So that's a brilliant idea there. So those really resonated with me. Those different points that really keep things sort of linked into whatever school policies are, and that's great because the DSL and the leadership team would spend a long time making sure that the AUP and everything else that's in there is fit for purpose. So if you can follow those guidelines, that's a great approach there. I think your idea around using Google Alerts is really useful. Again, it's being mindful of what's out there being said. It's something that I use myself for sort of keeping an eye on what's being said about me and things as well. So that really resonates with me too. Alan, did you have any others to add on to what Beverly shared there?
I thought they were all really good points from Beverly. I've also got a couple of Google alerts set up for Alan Mackenzie, and in all the years it's been set up, it's never been a hit on my name. There seems to be some famous lawyer in Australia, and I only ever get hits on him. So, a couple of other things. I would perhaps mention is just a good old dollop of common sense. A lot of the time, I think, again, very generically, when people are behind a screen, they forget what's on the other side of that screen. It's the good old online disinhibition effect. And it's a key message that we tell year 4 and 5 children: think before you post. And yet it's so important for every single one of us, because that part of the brain there, the frontal lobe, when it's behind a screen and you haven't got that very social contact with other people, such as eyes and frowns and arm movements and everything else, the brain can fail to risk assess quite easily when you're behind a screen. So it's taken that extra 2 to 3 seconds just to critically think about what you're saying and what the audience is as well. Is it a private or a public audience? And let's remember that although there are private chats and private services and private messaging, nothing's ever private. That's just not true at all. Another thing I would say is, especially for professionals that are perhaps nervous about engaging, is pick your platform wisely. A lot of people tend to perhaps focus onto Twitter or X or whatever we're going to be calling it tomorrow. I used to do that, as you do, Mark. I know you do a lot, and Beverly yourself as well. But I'm not as active on Twitter as I used to be, because it's just become a nightmare, quite frankly. The algorithmic nature of Twitter, and I just don't enjoy it anymore. LinkedIn can be good. If you can get past all the advertising there's now on LinkedIn, but if you're just looking for advice and guidance and linking up with like-minded people and like-minded organizations, actually LinkedIn is pretty good for that. You haven't got the echo chambers of or not as much as Twitter. So pick your platform wisely. Sadly, there isn't a lot of choice out there. There just isn't. But that would be another one. And the last one from me is, if you're uncomfortable engaging, you're just on there to find new resources or how to do things or look for advice and tips from other people, be a lurker. There's nothing wrong with that. Just be a lurker. Set up a social media platform with a completely different persona. There's nothing immoral about doing that at all. And just lurk and see what other people are doing. Just sit there silently and watch what they're doing. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
No, that's some great advice shared there as well, Alan. Thank you very much indeed. And hi to Rick Cowell from the ANME, the Association of Network Managers in Education, who's watching the webinar as well. Thanks for your comments in the chat about WhatsApp channels, the new Twitter, he says that they are. So thanks for feeding into the conversation there, Rick. I wanted to dive into some advice for DSLs now, for safeguarding leads. What do you think, and I'll jump to you first, Alan, if that's okay. What do you think are the key areas that safeguarding leads and educators should be aware of when supporting young people with online safety?
Okay, well, probably the key one that I mentioned earlier on was from the perspective of children and young people. They're hardwired to take risks and make mistakes, so they're looking for support and guidance, and I think that's a really important one. From an educational aspect, probably a controversial one, but don't talk about online safety. Just don't, because and there's reasons behind that. You know, for example, whenever I go into a school, a secondary school in particular, I'm sure you've found this as well, Beverly. You know, you'll get introduced to the year nines, for example, and they'll introduce you and say, right, you're here for an online safety talk. And that's when the heads go back and the eyes go in the air and the arms flop down and everyone's, I can't be interested. We're not getting this all over again. Be creative with your talks, with your titles. You know, I don't give online safety talks. You know, I might talk about, you know, year 10s and 11s. I might talk about employment. Year 5s, I can walk into a year 6 classroom or a year 5 classroom and say, right, children, today we're talking about gaming. Yes, you know, all hands are in the air, brilliant. And, you know, immediately they're focused, they're engaged. If you say, today, children, we're talking about online safety, here we go again. You know, so that would be a really key one. Try to be creative, and the reason for that is, I think as adults, many of us fall into that trap of still seeing the online and the real world as something which is separate, and that's just not the case. It's only separate because it wasn't there when we were their age. You know, to them, there is no separation. Their online life is their real life, you know. So, you know, we really need to have a refocus on that. And don't scare, support. You know, we're not there to give scary talks and talk about the worst of humanity and that sort of thing. We do have to talk about the worst of humanity, of course we do, but there are ways of doing that. You know, it's not about scaring the living daylights out of people, because the reality is when we're talking things like, you know, exploitation, CSE, CSA, you know, whatever, the reality is that you are going to be triggering some people, some students in that audience. It's such a difficult one to engage with. And yet it's equally a very, very important one because of the scale of things that are getting worse. And what I mentioned earlier is, you know, for me, you know, talking to students of whatever age, it's really about getting them to use, you know, technology appropriately, the whole digital literacy aspects of it, and how to recognize, manage, and mitigate risk. You know, so for example, if you're talking to students about, I don't know, grooming, for example, you know, here are the things to look for. Well, I don't believe in those sorts of things, because the whole point of grooming is that you don't know you're being groomed. That's the whole point of grooming. You know, so it's about giving examples of something, you know, where something has gone wrong. You know, and understanding that the victim is always the victim. You know, we've got to be still very, very clear of victim blaming language. Nobody ever intends to do that, but those words can sometimes, you know, easily slip out. And, you know, I've done it myself before. You know, hands in the air. I am guilty of that. The final one from me, Mark, sorry if I'm rabbiting on, but the final one from me is always be aware of the iceberg effect, especially safeguarding leads. I mentioned earlier about motivations, that there is always a reason for behavior. They're always 100% of the time. And that behavior, that motivation is just not always obvious at all. For example, last week, I had to go round to the house of it was a 12-year-old young lady, just turned 13 actually, who had been, she'd been referred to the school, by the school, to the MACE team, the multi-agency child exploitation team, because of some very, very serious concerns about her behaviour and what she was doing online. And essentially, the MACE panel put her down as a low risk. I read through it and I thought, no, there's something not quite right here. Anyway, long story short, I went and visited this young lady and her mum. without going into any detail, she was sharing videos of herself which were illegal in nature. Let's just leave it at that. And they were really quite nasty stuff. But we formed a rapport very, very quickly. She was a lovely young lady, and she explained to me that what she had experienced when she was 2, 3, 4 years old and onward in relation to really serious domestic violence in the house had culminated in the behavior of her now at 12, 13 years of age, where she wanted to do something which would just take her mind off it. And as part of that doing something, you know what I'm talking about, as part of that doing something, she was getting affirmation back from other people, positive affirmation back from other people. And that's what she was looking at. And so she knew full well what she was doing. So from the MACE team's perspective, she needed a safeguarding visit. From my perspective, she needed psychotherapy. She needed some very, very serious help. I was totally out my depth talking to this young lady. So the iceberg effect, sorry, that was quite deep for a Thursday afternoon. But that iceberg effect is so, so important. What you see on the top is never, ever what's happening underneath.
Mm.
No, I think you're absolutely right there, Alan. Some lovely things there, and a poignant but difficult. Often these conversations are quite difficult. I'm mindful of time, Beverly, and I really want to ask you a question about some of the things you've authored. Your books have won awards, and they're really well received by critics and educators alike for helping young people learn about using technology, being online, all these different things. So, with this success, what's your secret?
Well, thank you, Mark. So, I have written other books apart from the children's book series, but I've actually got them with me here today. So it's The Digital Adventures of Ava and Chip, which is something that I dreamed up this series in a lockdown, and it was part of my response to normalizing conversations around technology. I've worked in tech, for over 30 years, ever since I left uni, and there aren't enough women in tech, there aren't enough people from underrepresented groups, and there's a lot of fear about techs and are the robots coming? And in fact, tech is just embedded in our lives. So I really want to see reading for pleasure around technology. So I just started writing effectively. So the first one here, I've got it here, is a plug. I don't know if you can see that. It's I think my screen is blurred. The Digital Adventures of Ava and Chip. First book is Smart City. And then the next book is Self-Driving Car. And essentially, there's language in there, such as, usernames and passwords. Whether you're in a read aloud situation, or a child is reading alone, or it's family time and you're reading together, then you can have these conversations. So that's a conversation you can have about being safe online, just from seeing the usernames and passwords described. In the second book, the Self-Driving Car, there's about autonomous vehicles. So you can start talking about how cars are trained, and which routes they're following, and any dangers with autonomous vehicles, and could these vehicles be sort of hacked? What are the risks here with online safety? So there's lots you can have around conversation by reading about tech for pleasure, and I'm just really, really keen to see that. So the secret is just talking from my own life and from my observations, and just being quite real about this and saying, let's talk about tech. Let's not be scared of it. Let's enjoy it.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you for sharing about your books there, Beverly. And as someone who's read some of your books as well, I say they're well worth checking out. Do you want to share where people can find out about those, Beverly?
Yes, the books are available on Amazon, and they're also available from my website, which is www.avachip, so avachipbooks.com altogether. I'll tweet about it later on also. You can also find them on Amazon, The Digital Adventures of Ava and Chip. And book 3 is out very soon also, so that's a bit of a shameless plug there.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you for sharing that, and no worries about the shameless plug. And you mentioned social media. Just a quick shout out mid-webinar. If you want to get in touch beyond this, then obviously you can find Beverly at Ms. B. Clarke on social media. You can find Alan at ESafety Adviser. I note some points here from someone in the audience, Bronwyn Desjardins, who's a very old friend of mine, a former, I said when I was an Apple distinguished educator, I met her a long time ago. She shared in the chat something that would be quite interesting for a dive into. Unfortunately, we haven't got time to dive into your comments today, Bronwyn. But what I have done is I've copied those, and I'll share your details if you want to talk to discuss that issue further with Alan and Beverly, and then that's something I'm sure they would be happy to do. Certainly, I can talk with you about that too. Also, don't forget to follow NetSupport group. We're providing the webinars for you across these few weeks. Next week's reminder, webinar next Thursday from 4 to 5 p.m. BST is focusing on data privacy, data protection and data usage. That's with Tony Shepherd and Claire Archibald, diving into those really important areas around things like data protection, impact assessments, how we keep our students safe when they're using technology through technologies like firewalls and all these different things, and our responsibilities around all of that. And speaking about responsibilities, I wanted to jump into my favourite abbreviation of the year, or every year, Alan, which is KICSI. KICSI, Keeping Children Safe in Education. I mean, there's an awful lot in there which is very similar to what it has been, but every year there are micro changes. But this year's brought a few things into sharper focus around monitoring, around training requirements. There's quite a few things in there to unpick. So I wondered, Alan, if you wouldn't mind sort of sharing for our safeguarding leads and teachers who are watching today, and probably some SLT too. What are the key areas you think schools should be focusing upon when it comes to making sure we meet those KICSI requirements? And if you're in another province, I've been quite fortunate recently to have dived into Scotland's requirements, Wales's requirements, and Northern Ireland's as well. So it's good and pleasing to see that there's lots of parity across those different provinces as well. So bearing in mind I mentioned KICSI, but it might be for a wider audience, Alan, what do you think schools should be focusing upon to ensure coverage?
Yeah, as you say, Mark, there's changes and updates, and every single year, and they do essentially tend to be micro changes, and much of it, I don't know if it's just me, much of it does tend to be common sense, to be perfectly honest. I'll just unpick a couple briefly. Just watching time here, I'll unpick a couple briefly. The one that I did pick up on which was actually a change from 2022, but it's been reiterated in 2023, was in relation to online searches for job applicants. In other words, as a part of that shortlisting process, I hoped to see that DfE would actually give some guidance on that this year. In other words, what are schools actually supposed to do? How far do you go back? Et cetera, et cetera. The reality is they haven't, or it's not very good anyway. But the requirements that came out in KICSI to carry out searches has been a requirement in the workforce for years and years. It's nothing new. It just happens to have been put in keeping children safe in education and focusing on teaching and support staff as well. My advice is it's shortlisted candidates only. You have to tell them. You've got to tell them and why you're doing it. There is no argument with that as well. And you don't need to be doing a deep dive. You don't need to be going far and wide. A Google search and maybe a basic search across social media. But that is the reality. That's as far as you need to go. You don't need to be You don't need to be an intelligence officer and spending hours and hours trying to find out somebody's username on TikTok. That's just not the case at all. The second one was the requirement to meet cybersecurity standards. Rick Cow, Rick, I'm seeing you for years. Hello to you. I just saw you on the participants link there. It's probably better to answer that. But the requirements, the interesting one there is this training of all staff in the basics of cybersecurity, and I think that's absolutely key, because schools really are starting to become a focus for some of these organised crime groups that are out there now, because they see schools as an easy target. That's the reality of it, and cases, as we know, in the UK are going up of viruses. Not a day goes by when I get an email from a school that's got a virus on it. Not a single day goes by. So a lot of it is going back to the basics. And as you quite rightly picked up on there, Mark, probably the big one was the filtering and monitoring. But again, going back to the reality, in the past I've done hundreds of audits, online safety audits, in schools, and I find the filtering and monitoring to be, really good. What has been missing in the past is the formalization of that. In other words, whose responsibility actually is it? In the past, in many cases, it's always been devolved to IT. Well, IT there are to implement and the operational aspects of filtering and monitoring, but it has to be managed by senior leaders. And in this context, it's the designated safeguarding lead, plus a governor that takes responsibility for that. And I think that's good. That is a really good implementation into keeping children safe. So from my perspective, the filtering monitoring solutions, whichever you have in school, whether it's NetSupport or whoever everybody else, it's not treating this now as a tool, but treating it as an annual strategy. And that strategy has to be reviewed on an at least annual basis, which basically means who's doing the monitoring or filtering, what are you monitoring or filtering, and is it actually working, and is it applying across all of our devices, and is it in the context of the person? In other words, is it a year 7? It is a year 12. Is it a member of staff? It is a volunteer in school. So is the appropriate level of filtering and monitoring applied to that individual year group, class group, whatever it is. And as I said earlier, reviewing that as well, which means, does your filter do the job that it's supposed to be doing? Now, the last thing you want to be doing is going onto a school device and checking on adult sites to see that it's blocking on adult sites. You really don't want to be doing that. That's not appropriate at all. But I'm sure everybody's aware, but just in case you're not, the UK Safer Internet Centre developed the website testfiltering.com, where it will test your filter for you. So you don't see anything on your screen. It will basically just come up and say, yeah, it's working, or no, it's not. So that is an easy solution for schools to do, and also check that you are on that same website. Is that your filtering and monitoring solution do comply with all of the requirements that are on there, which there are many, and I think that's really important, because I have been to schools in the past who have had no internet filter in place whatsoever. It didn't exist. Equally, I've been into schools who, for the purposes of a lack of funding, used a freely available internet filter that they downloaded from the internet and used that in a secondary environment. And that is not acceptable to be doing that. There have been too many horrendous cases in the past. So it's one that we need to be waking up to. So like I say, I don't think that there's anything particularly new. I think it's just a clarification and formalization of the strategy, of which I think most schools, to be honest, were already doing anyway.
Brilliant stuff, Alan. Thank you. And your point around cybersecurity is absolutely key. Like I say, schools are easy targets. And lovely shout out from you to Rick Cowell. And as if by magic, Rick's jumped into the chat and said, all schools need to get in touch with their local cyber resilience centres, get registered with them. All in conjunction with the police, and they have so much to offer education in terms of training, resources, alerts, and more. So thanks to a friend of NetSupport, Mr. Rick Cowell from the Association of Network Managers in Education. Thank you for sharing that, Rick. If you want to learn more, visit the ANME's website, and you can learn more from them. And if you're a network manager in education, you can obviously get involved and join in with them too. We're running out of time very, very quickly here, but I did want to ask one final question. something that I've shared, and isn't just me, but many of us have shared that. Of course, we have our annual Safer Internet Day, but of course, every day should be a Safer Internet Day. Just as the last question, to both you, Beverly, and to Alan, and I'll come to you first, Beverly, if I could. What would you recommend as two things, perhaps, that schools should do every day to make every day a safer internet day?
Thank you, Mark. It's a good question. So I'd say be aware of what the young people are doing. So, say for example, what's the latest TikTok trend, and talk to them about it, and talk to them about the online behavior. I cannot stress enough how much I believe that talk is essential to this whole conversation, and to ensure that we understand, what the motivations are. I mean, that's been coming through in this webinar, and I really feel strongly about that. And model safe online behavior. So, just have those open conversations, just keep having them. And also, I'd say embed safety into every subject. So it isn't just the IT lesson that is happening, or just in PSHE, it's across the board. So every single lesson is doing something online, tech is everywhere. So then the conversations need to be happening in every single subject. Just, not we're doing online safety, as Alan said, it's just we're just seamlessly talking about this. This is part of the world in which we live in, and just making it easy for students to actually have these conversations with adults, and for it to be a safe environment. If they bring any concerns to adults, that they will be treated with respect and listened to.
Brilliant. And again, simple sage advice, simple but yet sage advice there, Beverly. Thank you very much indeed. Alan, two from you, please.
I
What can
think
we
the first
do
one
to
is
make every day a
reiterate.
safer
Yeah,
internet day?
I
Go
think
on.
the first one is reiterating what Beverly said there, is embedded into the culture of the school, not only in education, but certainly from a policy perspective, from a technology perspective, and from an educational perspective as well, and recognizing that online is not separate from the real world. To go back to the AI example, because AI is coming. There's no getting away from it. It's coming, and it's coming into education. That's the bottom line. So, are we going to get to the point where we're all using ChatGPT in the classroom? Well, possibly, or if not, there's going to be something similar to it. Well, there's an ideal, opportunity is where you are doing that. You just reiterate key messages that we talk around things like misinformation, disinformation, checking your sources. What are those sources? How old are those sources? It's just that reiteration of key messages when you are using online technology, or whatever it is. So it's very much making it a culture rather than something is separate. And I think another one, I think is such an important one, is that online safety is safeguarding, and safeguarding is the responsibility of everybody, not the computing lead, not the head teacher or the ICT lead. It's absolutely everybody. And yet, there are. It sounds terrible, but I go to so many schools, and I'll speak to the children in the class, and the teacher will say, I've got no idea about all of this. I have to question and say, well, what training have you had? None of this was difficult at all. This was all really, really basic stuff. So have you had your training? And if you have, were you listening to it? This is safeguarding at the end of the day. And that is absolutely key. And me as a visitor coming into school, I'll quite often pick up on some things that the children are either saying or they're not saying, which can also be a concern as well. But as the teacher, these children far, far better than I do, and so it's all, half of this is all about you listening in and keeping your ears open, just in case you hear something that's out of the ordinary for that particular child as well. So very much the culture, and it's the culture of safeguarding, is everybody's responsibility.
Now, that's a really important and sobering, brilliant way to sort of end the conversation today, but a sobering one too. And if I could just share my sort of take on that, I used to work with a colleague, people know him quite well because he's written a few books, David Didow, and he talks about how every teacher is a teacher of English. So whether you teach geography or French even, or maths or whatever, we're all teachers of English. In fact, we're all teachers of maths as well, because numeracy fits into every subject in so much of a form as well. But I think that analogy rings absolutely true when it comes to safeguarding. We're all teachers of safeguarding. We've all got a responsibility, that loco parentis, that important role of what we do, to make sure that every day is a safer internet day for all of our children. Look, thank you so much to you, Beverly, and to you, Alan, for taking the time to join me for this webinar today. Apologies to those of you who were here from the top of the show for a few of the technical difficulties, but if anything, it proves that it can happen to the best, or the worst in my case perhaps, of us. But thank you so much for joining us for this, our second webinar from NetSupport. Thank you to NetSupport for providing the platform for us to have this important conversation as well. NetSupport will be in touch with you in the not too distant future with a downloadable version of this webinar for you to watch back and play back and share and all those different things as well. Even to suspect it will be on YouTube for you to share with people as well. Don't forget, next week, same time, same place, not same date, next Thursday on the 5th of October, I'll be talking with Tony Shepherd and Claire Archibald around data protection, data privacy and usage of technology in education. Please do sign up for that. Look forward to you joining us. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to comment in the chat, and if you haven't, that's fine too. Thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on the next webinar here from NetSupport. Thanks, everyone.